I'm Anne, this is Books, Yarn, and Tea, and today I'm doing my March wrap-up and my April TBR. The first book that I finished in March comes as no surprise if you watched my last video, and that was The Hero of Ages by Brandon Sanderson. This is the final book in the initial Mistborn trilogy, and was 5 stars. Yeah. I stayed up until 3 a.m. to finish this book. I was sobbing through like the last 40 pages. Brandon Sanderson, once again, made me cry. The next book that I read in March was Fallen Kingdoms by Morgan Rhodes. If you watch Lainey over at Ginger Reads Lainey, you've heard a lot about this series. I actually listened to this on audiobook through my library. I like this audiobook a lot. The voice that the narrator used for Magnus sounded a lot like Jon Snow from Game of Thrones, which actually fits his character pretty well. This was pretty predictable for me. A lot of people talk about Fallen Kingdoms as kind of Game of Thrones for the YA genre. Maybe because I'm familiar with Game of Thrones, I could see a lot of the plot twists coming. If you are unfamiliar with the fantasy genre and are particularly, I think, coming from a more contemporary reading background, I think this would be a really good book to get you into fantasy. Heard from other people around BookTube that the series gets better as it goes on, and I am interested in continuing the series, just not at the moment. So I gave Fallen Kingdoms 4 stars. Again, predictable if you're familiar with fantasy, but if you're looking for something to get into fantasy, I think this would be a good place to start. The next book I finished in March was The Winter's Curse by Marie Rukowski. This is the first book in the Winter's trilogy. I loved this series so much. This was probably a little bit more what I was hoping for from Fallen Kingdoms. This is not predictable, and there are so many twists and turns. There's a lot of political intrigue, which I really enjoyed. I love the characters. I love Kestrel. I love Aaron. They are my new OTP. I love them so much. And Marie Rukowski's writing is so beautiful. Like, I can't even explain how beautiful it is. It will tear at your heart. It's wonderful. I gave Winter's Curse 4.5-ish stars. Mainly because I wanted a little bit more world building. I didn't feel like I had a great perspective on how the world was situated, but I will talk about my thoughts on The Winter's Crime in just a minute. The next book I finished is the next book, sort of, in the Mistborn series, not just the trilogy. That is Alloy of Law. This takes place about 300 years after The Hero of Ages. Technology has become much more advanced. It's kind of a combination of fantasy and western, which is very intriguing. This is kind of a book to bridge the gap between Mistborn and the Wax and Wayne trilogy, which the first book is coming out soon, I think later this year. It was interesting. I didn't connect as much with the characters. The story was really interesting. The female characters are not as strong in this, and I really loved Vin. So I gave this 4 stars because it's Brandon Sanderson. Obviously, it's still a great book, but it didn't quite reach the point of me being obsessed with it as Mistborn. Next book is, you know, a book I still have out from the library. This is Terry Pratchett's The Color of Magic. Obviously, Terry Pratchett died in March, and I have wanted to pick up his books for a while. The Discworld series, it really intrigues me. I actually read this book before. I read it last year while I was still in school, and I didn't remember any of it. I read it as ebook. That's a question. Let me know in the comments if you feel like you remember reading ebooks as well as you do as written books, because I feel like I don't. Really like Terry Pratchett's writings. Again, they kind of like The Alloy of Law. The characters just didn't quite suck me in the way I was hoping, but I do plan on continuing the Discworld series. Again, not a series I'm gonna like go out and read all 40 books right now. I'm thinking I may read a Discworld book a month maybe, which means I'll finish it in about 4 years. I agree with Elizabeth over on Books and Pieces that publication order might be a good way to go with this. So that's how I'm going to read that. I'll link her video, which is fantastic, about what order you should read Discworld in below. If Hero of Ages broke my heart in the beginning of the month, this book broke my heart in the end of the month, and that is The Winter's Crime by Marie Rukowski. This is the second book in the Winter's trilogy. Oh my god. This is 5 stars. I love it so much. All my kind of complaints about not having enough world building in the first book, totally, nope, this has got it covered. Also, I don't know how I'm going to wait a year for the next book because Kestrel. And finally, the last book I read this month, well, graphic novel, is Kingsman: The Secret Service by Mark Millar and Dave Gibbons. Mark Millar is the creator of Kick-Ass, if you're familiar with that series, and Dave Gibbons is the illustrator from Watchmen. So, you know, 2 pretty big people in the graphic novel world. This was recently turned into a movie with Colin Firth, and that's the reason I picked it up. I was intending to read the graphic novel and compare it to the movie, except I haven't seen the movie. I really enjoyed this. I like spy stuff a lot. I grew up watching James Bond, and this is very reminiscent to kind of the campiness and drama of James Bond. It's also kind of a coming-of-age story for Gary, who has had a pretty tough life and is taken under the wing of Jack London, his uncle, who is a secret agent. This is kind of what I wanted Deadly Class, the graphic novel about the assassin school, to be, because it does kind of talk about, you know, learning how to be a spy. Also are like social commentaries embedded in this, and there are a lot of fun celebrity cameos. So I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It's just kind of a fun, kind of goofy, dramatic read. If you like James Bond type stuff, this is definitely similar. I know I said in my last video I may not read a whole lot of fantasy once I finish up Hero of Ages. Oops. So this month, in April, I'm thinking I'm going to try and get away from fantasy a little bit. I've already started a couple of books that I'm planning to continue into April. The first is The Last Flight of Poxel West by Daniel Torde. This is a debut novel. This deals with World War II and the complexities of memory. Dual perspective, there's a young Jewish boy, and Poxel is kind of his surrogate uncle who has written this memoir, and it comes out that maybe the things he's writing about weren't things he actually experienced. Obviously, as a German major, World War II history is pretty fascinating for me. I also really enjoyed studying memory in college, so this is an interesting one. I'm intrigued to see what I think about it. I currently have on audiobook The Giver by Lois Lowry. I've never read this, and I'm enjoying it so far. I'm already almost a quarter of the way through. It's a pretty quick audiobook. I can definitely see how it's influenced more modern dystopian YA, but I'm really enjoying it so far, so I'll see what I think about that. I just got a phone call, so if my angle changed, that's what's going on. The next book on my TBR for April is The Man Outside by Wolfgang Borchardt. I cannot even explain how much I adore Wolfgang Borchardt. He is a German author. He wrote directly after World War II in an era known as Trümmerliteratur, which is what I wrote my German thesis on. I consider that period to be about 1945 to 1947, mainly because that's when he wrote. This is the English translation of his Gesamtwerk, which is his complete works, except it's not actually all of his works. But The Man Outside, the title, which I don't like that translation. In German, it's Draußen vor der Tür, which means outside before the door, sort of. That is the name of his radio play, which is probably his most famous work. We'll definitely be doing probably a series of videos on him. I love Wolfgang Borchardt so much. First book I bought for myself in a very long time. I have a video coming soon probably about why I don't buy a whole lot of books, why the majority of the books you see on my channel are from the library. But I'm weird and I like getting library copies of things. This is actually from the University of Wisconsin-Waukesha campus, which I used to live in Wisconsin, and I think that's cool. Also, apparently this was only checked out twice the entire time it was in the library. So clearly, post-war German literature, not a popular subject. With the last month, I'm kind of leaving it open-ended as to what else I'm going to read. Since a lot of these have to do with World War II, I'm thinking I might pick up like The Book Thief, which I have on my shelf but I haven't read. It's actually right there. I'm also doing Camp NaNoWriMo this month. I'm aiming for about 30,000 words rather than the full 50K. Although this is the first day of already like 2 days ahead in terms of writing, so We'll see if I bump up my word count. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of the books that I read last month that I'm planning to read this month. If you have any recommendations based on what I've read and what I am reading. Also, I started a blog this month. I've discovered that I'm not good at posting videos. What a shocker. I'm planning to do reviews on that blog of all the books that I read. I will still obviously plan on making review videos for those books that I really enjoyed or I have really strong opinions about. You can check out, the link is down in the description. There are a couple reviews already up, including The Winter's Crime and Kingsman. I will also be updating that about my writing for Camp NaNoWriMo, so check that out. Obviously follow me on Twitter. It's going to be inundated with a lot of tweets at Nano Word Sprints this month. I will see you next time. Bye!